Hi again then guys, and welcome to another car review from GT Sport. It's actually been a little while since we looked at a vehicle specifically in this game, of course a day one vehicle, and this is a revisitation of a car review from the GT6 days. The baby of the litter, if you will, from the Tomahawk lineage, the Tomahawk S. Now the funny thing is, somewhat ironically, this is no longer the least powerful Tomahawk we have. In GT6 it was, by a massive margin, around 450 horsepower less than the GTSR, and of course less than half the power of the mighty X. In this game though, it's actually not the least powerful, because that one of course is the newer rear-winged version in Group 1, which has, if I recall correctly, like 940 horsepower, I think fully tuned, and is not as quick as this one, even with that level of power. Or at least not as quick in a straight line. Now, as far as what this car can do, of course it has been neutered to some degree compared to the previous game, as all of the vehicles in this game have. In GT6 it was comfortably a 320 mile an hour car, which was incredibly good for a car with 1006 horsepower. Don't get me wrong, having four-figure power is always good, but that is not really that much in Gran Turismo terms. There were plenty of supercars in the game, even real ones, that had way more power than that, which were not that quick, at least not under their own power. Plenty could do that with nitrous or with slipstream, but this car could do that just under its own power. And of course, speaking of doing it under its own power, you do technically have the boost helping you as well, although it's just not a nitrous injection as many of the other cars would have. Now this game does carry that over, or at least it does now, because it didn't for quite a long time, but now thankfully we can use the boost system in this one and the other two Tomahawks as well. I don't think the Group 1 version has that, if I recall correctly. That doesn't seem fair if it does anyway, but in terms of what this car has on its side, apart from just that sheer power, well, across the board it is very impressive. 7 litre, of course a V10 engine, just like the others. The torque is not all that high, which isn't surprising. None of the Tomahawks have anywhere near the level of torque that you would assume they would. They're all power, very like a Formula kind of engine. The torque though is decent. 501 pound-feet is not bad by any stretch, especially when, crucially, this car is not heavy. In fact, it's a lot lighter than it looks. Now, it's not as light as the GTSR or the X, but it isn't heavy by any stretch. 921 kilos is not much more than an LMP1 car. And that actually brings me to an easy misconception which many people could have about all of the Tomahawks, and sometimes people get exasperated by how quick these cars are. And even though of course a 420 mile an hour top speed is obviously not realistic, it's theoretically possible, but try doing that in real life and see if you survive it on road tyres. Well, of course you're not going to. In terms of handling though, and cornering ability, these kind of abilities that these cars have are theoretically possible and far more realistic than those sheer top speeds are. And one of the major contributing factors to that is how light these Tomahawks are. They look a lot heavier than the Red Bulls, but even though they are heavier, they're not as much heavier as you'd think. They easily look twice as heavy, maybe even more, but they're not. They're about, what, 400 kilos more than a top-of-the-line fan car from Red Bull, like 550 kilos, I believe those were. This at 921, I think the X is like 750, the lightest one of course is the GTSR at a ridiculous 663, but the thing that you've got to remember about these Tomahawks is they could very easily be like a Daytona prototype. And what I mean by that is a Daytona prototype race car, such as the Fords or the Rileys or the Corvettes, is that yes, they technically have a full body. And that can deceive you into thinking that it's kind of like a proper car, a full-size vehicle, to some degree, at least those who aren't as familiar with how the frame of a race car and a chassis would look. A monocoque, for instance, in particular. You look at a Formula car and you can see there's not much there. It's a very bare-bones frame, basically just an engine, a seat, and some wheels. If you look at even an LMP1 like a Peugeot 908 or an Audi R10, it looks like it's got a lot more inside it, because the car is larger, and you could argue even more so with the aforementioned Daytona prototypes. They are full-bodied looking vehicles, but underneath there's not really that much to them, and I believe that that's probably what SRT did with these Tomahawks. Yes, they have a conventional hypercar looking body, but underneath it's probably not much more than a bare bones monocoque frame with, yes, a large engine, but still not necessarily an overly heavy one. Plus, as you can see from the cabin, it's a single-seater design, completely bare carbon fibre with no kind of amenities or luxuries. It is essentially just a full-bodied prototype car, and as such, I do tend to give these cars a little bit more leeway than some people seem to when it comes to the abilities and the cornering. Top speeds, as I said, is still unrealistic, but you can give it a pass because it's a Vision GT at the end of the day. Now, in terms of how this one specifically compares to the others, well, my thoughts have changed on this car. In GT6 it was great. In fact, it was a very OP vehicle. It was one of the cars which was the quickest for its performance level, not just for its power level, and consequently it would get banned from a lot of lobbies, especially top speed lobbies. The handling though was good, and that was the crucial advantage. It was so much more forgiving, even with the boost system on, than either of the other two. Unfortunately, that's gone now. It's not really a forgiving car anymore. I am using the boost system, but I haven't changed any of the settings, no traction control, the lowest setting of anti-lock brakes, and I'm even running it on sport soft tyres rather than racing. Under those circumstances, so basically what you get out of the box, the low speed handling is not good at all. In fact, it has this weird type of feeling where it gets very light and floaty. The car suddenly feels like it doesn't have enough weight, and it kind of feels like a hyper-realised version of what low downforce feels like, and that's probably what they were trying to simulate, but it doesn't feel accurate in this car. Likewise with the brakes, they just don't feel good enough. At high speeds they slow you down real fast and they do a fantastic job, but once again it's almost like once you get right down to like a 90-degree slow corner, such as some of the corners here at Le Mans, the car just loses all of its handling ability. It's very, very strange because there are a number of cars which could feel like this, you know, like a Caparo for instance, where you have to be going very fast to get the kind of downforce that you need to turn a corner. The car is infamous for that. But this car doesn't really have anything in that regard that should make it feel more like that than, for instance, any other Formula car or prototype. If anything, it should feel the opposite, because if I recall correctly, it's still an all-wheel drive car, so there's no reason for it to suddenly feel very strange at low speeds like it does. With that being said, of course it's still very fast. Around 320 or less here at the new La Sarthe circuit is certainly not slow, and as I said, that's not with any tuning. You can tune it to be way quicker than that, I believe still up around 300 if not more, so it hasn't lost its edge there. But in the grand scheme of things, if you try to take it up against, for instance, a normal race car, something like an LMP, maybe even a lower level LMP, I would often give those cars the edge. Something like a 940 horsepower Audi R18 or a Peugeot 908 can still give you a better lap of around La Sarthe than this can. And that is kind of a weird thing to say about a Tomahawk, because typically you think of it as being basically the fastest thing out there, but in this game they've actually, you could say, made it more realistic, which is never a bad thing. At the same time though, they have given it very, very strange handling characteristics at low speeds, and it's that in particular, accompanied with the weak brakes at low speed for no apparent reason, that can definitely catch you out. It's a car that you can have a ton of fun with, and if you master it, you could certainly have great fun in online lobbies or maybe the occasional FIA event, but generally speaking, it can bite back. So give the car respect, more than anything else be wary of those lower speeds, and if at all possible, try to keep it on tracks where you've got a very high average speed. For instance, I would say it's probably a better car to feature on something like Monza or even the Nürburgring than it is, ironically, at Le Mans, because even though Le Mans has a fantastic straight, there's also far more really, really slow corners than something like Monza would have. Overall, it's the baby Tomahawk, so more often than not it doesn't get the same love that the others do. However, you could still give it a look. Chances are, if you've been playing the game for a while, you've probably won one of these at some point. So give me your thoughts down below on the car. Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Do you think it was better in GT6, or do you perhaps prefer it now? Either way, as I said, tell me about it down below, and stick around on the channel for more reviews. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.